Hello and welcome to Roll for Adventure. I'm Trent.
I'm Bren.
And I'm Bonnie.
And today we'll be looking at Mythender, a game where you sunder the heavens and stab Norse gods in the face.
You can pick up the PDF of the rulebook online for free, but to get the best experience, you should go out and buy a big bag of 6-sided dice.
And then another bag.
And probably a third to be safe.
Mythender is a very tactile game, and you'll be missing out on a lot of the fun if you don't have the bits and pieces. The book will tell you exactly what you need.
You'll also want to have heavy metal music playing in the background and a group that's ready to swear up a storm.
This isn't a game where you can sit back and let the story pass you by. Your characters are fighting gods, and you're expected to make your character as epic as possible.
You play as a Mythender, a human who has been wronged by the gods in some fashion and has been granted crazy powers to get their revenge.
The key mechanic to being a Mythender is corruption. The more corruption your character takes, the more powerful they become.
So why don't you just max out your corruption and become super powerful? Well, there's the small matter of losing your humanity along the way.
You can eventually become a god yourself by taking full corruption. That comes with one significant drawback. Your fellow Mythenders are now going to be trying to kill you as well.
With this in mind, some players will try and avoid taking any corruption, but you can't avoid it entirely. Every time you take damage, you also gain corruption.
It's a really fun and tricky balancing act, trying to make your character powerful enough to challenge the gods without becoming one yourself.
Mythender is a game where you really need to dial it up to 11. You don't just hit someone with your sword, you cleave through an army with a single blow.
In most combat RPGs, you describe what you're going to try and do, and then roll to see if you succeed. In Mythender, you always succeed, and you're just rolling to see how well you did.
There are 3 types of actions you can do: legendary, mythic, and titanic. A legendary action might be, I chop down a giant tree with a single blow.
Stepping that up to mythic, it might be, I rip the giant tree out of the ground with my bare hands and use it as a club to smite the enemy army.
If you want to go titanic, you might tear up the entire forest with a wave of one hand, then turn it into a swirling vortex of death with the other.
So there's basically no limit on what your Mythender can accomplish. Just remember that you're going to be paying the cost in corruption.
And the regular folk of the world are going to pay the price when you start tearing up the landscape.
It's easy to get carried away with how cool everything is, only to realize later that you've really screwed up the world.
Well, that's a quick breakdown of the core systems of Mythender. After the break, we'll go into the strengths and weaknesses of the game and give you our overall impressions. Stick around, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Roll for Adventure. We're having a look at the game Mythender. So guys, we've had a look at the core mechanics of the game, but how do you think you'd sum up the overall feel of Mythender?
It's epic!
Yeah, I mean, there's very few games out there that it's like, so guys, what do you want to do today? I think we should walk up to Thor and punch him in the face.
It really captures that scale of epic. You know, you're battling gods, and it shines through this game, absolutely.
It's a very story-driven narrative game. There's very few, the mechanics all sort of sit in the background and you're like, I'm going to throw my spear but hold on to it so I sail through the air and slam it into his face as I land. It's so narratively driven.
It's all about epic descriptions and really fleshing out what you're going to do. You don't just, slash someone.
Or see if something works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does, but how epic is it? And it's all about dialing it up, just making it bigger. Your GM might be saying, no, make it a bigger action and bigger feat. Just really dial it up.
I like the fact that you can really amp this game up or pull it back when and if you need to. Every time you take an action, you really have that option of which of the 3 scales you use. You can just be legendary and just run around the battlefield, or mythic and do those really powerful things, or titanic where you have a shout so loud it cracks the dome of heaven, and really get to make that choice every time you go into battle.
For me personally, I found the game really brought out the role-playing in me. Mm-hmm. A lot of games you can sit back and text on your phone while the game's happening around you, or when it's your turn you go, oh yeah, I'm gonna punch that guy in the face. In this, it's in the mechanics. You have to describe what you're doing. And you could just go, yeah, I punched that guy in the face, but it's not going to happen. And the way the mechanics work, and with everyone else around you going, yeah, I run up and I slam my fist. Like, it just encourages you to do that. It's really great.
Yeah, and you've got other players, coaxing you on, or the GM saying, make it bigger. And, so you, it's a little bit of committing, I suppose, but, that's definitely part of the game, and, like adding contribution while other people are going and just making it bigger.
Yeah, you really get the opportunity to reinforce everyone else's actions. It's like, oh, I could do this thing maybe, and it's like, oh, don't forget, man, you've got the first sword ever forged. Don't forget, rather than punching him in the face, stab him with the sword. Like, everyone gets that opportunity to add something, and it's really reinforcing and very, very creative.
This is a really great game for GMs who are tired of players that sit there and don't get into character.
Yep.
It's a great game to force your players to get into character.
Yeah, if you don't get into character and really do stuff, there's a very good likelihood you'll die. And you've really got it, that's a genuine concern. If you don't go big enough when you're fighting Mythender McClare, he will kill you and then you're trapped. So you've really got to push forward and really get out of your shell.
And that happened to me. In one of my games, I deliberately went, no, I want to see how far I can push this game. I'm going to sit back and not do anything and not gain corruption.
And be the conservative player.
Be the conservative, but I died. And when you die, you either get the chance to revive yourself, but you take a step closer to being a god, which is not good. Yeah. Or you can just sit out of the game. And no one's going to sit out of the game. So
well, because the rest of your group is still going. So
that's right.
Hell yeah, you're coming back to life, but taking that corruption on board.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really gets you straight back into the game. It sort of gives you a new motivation to use. That god killed me. How dare he kill me? I'm going to kill him now.
Start plotting your revenge already.
Yeah, like it's just immediately you're back into that, oh, this is on now.
Now, out of the book, Mythic Norden is the default campaign setting, I suppose you'd call it. But you can really mix things up and sort of play any sort of theme you prefer.
Mythic Norden is your classic Norse mythology. So you're fighting Thor and Loki. But you can really mix it up with any mythology you want. You can fight the Tuatha De Danann and go after the Celtic gods like the Morrigan, or fight the Egyptian gods of Set and Horus. You can even fight modern gods along the lines of Neil Gaiman's American Gods and fight media if you wanted.
I'm really excited to play an anime like Bleach and really go at each other.
Yeah, this game's very setting agnostic. So long as you really have a clear idea with your players of what you're trying to achieve, you can play just about anything. I was talking to one of my friends the other day and I was thinking, because of the nature of this game, we could actually try this as a My Little Pony game.
Except you're not going to kill each other.
No, but part of Mythender is that you don't need to be physically violent. Whilst that is a part of the game, you can actually beat myths by destroying their resolve to fight. If I was using a lighter sort of setting, it would be stopping them from being bad. And that nature of attacking someone's personality or their bad traits is just as important as that physical violence.
Yeah, so destroying the will of a god to fight is just as relevant as beating them physically.
Yeah, like slinging mud in their face is just as disparaging as like whacking with a sword.
Yeah.
This is really a tactile game. You need all the dice and tokens and everything printed out. I mean, I feel like you really miss out on a huge part of this game if you just don't have the giant sack full of dice that's needed to play this game.
It says that up front in the book. It's like, look, this game requires a lot of dice. If you don't want to go out and buy all these dice, then this might not be the game for you.
Yeah, but also to have everything tactile. So, you've got lightning tokens and
two different types of tokens and three different types of dice.
Yeah, so some assembly is required,
yeah.
But it's so important to have all these little bits for the game.
It makes a difference when you're playing, because then I can go, oh, I've got this giant pile of dice to roll. Yeah.
You've just got to really be careful that everything's clear and distinct. Like you said, there are two types of tokens in this game, lightning tokens and might tokens. When we were playing, we had gold coin, like plastic gold coins representing lightning, and heavy poker chips to represent might, so that you don't get mixed up with what's going on where and how much you have of each type of resource.
Yeah, I also found out with the character sheet, they've got locations for where you store these things. And to be another player and just have a quick glance at another person's character sheet, to see how much dice they've got in lightning and storm, you can see the volume of dice or the volume of tokens. It really sort of quantifies how they're going with all the other characters around the table.
You can see at a glance how other players are doing.
Yeah, one of the most satisfying things that I had was ripping up the enemy character sheets. I don't know why, but it's so enjoyable as a player.
I felt so gutted in the same instant. I was playing Thor and I had this whole handful of dice and you just went, I'm going to smite you, and I'm like, okay, I've got to hold on to some of these, and I've rolled and just this whole handful of dice just disappeared and I felt gutted. It was fantastic.
And then very satisfying.
The game has a very creatively done intro adventure that teaches you rules as you play. But it really illustrates one of the things that's really important in this game, and that's having a GM that can improv on the fly. There are situations where the myths will do things in the world that they, attack the Mythenders in a particular way, and you really need some very creative flair to be able to really bring these myths to life.
Well, yeah, you've got a GM that's really encouraging the players to be creative and dial it up. So as the GM, you really need to be able to respond to that and roll with the punches and sort of dial up your improv side as well.
That's what I struggled with. So I actually gave a go of GMing this game, and I'm not very much of an improv GM. I tend to work straight from campaigns. And I don't think it was quite as fun, because if I'm reading from the script and going, the Einhuyar are attacking you, and it says here they're throwing spears.
Yeah, but your players are sort of stunned to move
Yeah,
out
I've got to add more to that. There's more going on in a battle than just one line.
So being able to roll with that and sort of, just add more flair to it kind of thing would really help.
It makes for a better game.
Yeah, you've really got to personalize it. You've got to make sure that if Thor stole one of your children, that, Thor constantly mocks you about it. And you've got to really make sure that you tick your players off and really target them.
Yeah, this is really becoming a grudge match now.
I really like that there are no small deaths in Mythender. If you die, it's a big deal, like pumping out all that lightning to wound you and then rolling the dice and having all your dice just disappear to nothing. I love that. I've had games in D&D where someone will accidentally trip over something and then they'll lose their last hit point and then bleed to death in 3 rounds. And it's so anticlimactic, and it's like, no, this was my 17th level fighter, that shouldn't happen. Mythender, you get that. You die in a big way. You don't just taper off into nothing.
Yeah. This is definitely a blaze of glory, isn't it?
Yeah. After the break, we'll be speaking with the designer of Mythender. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Roll for Adventure. Today we're looking at Mythender. We're lucky enough to be joined by Ryan Macklin, the designer of Mythender, all the way from Seattle. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Hello, thanks for having me here.
So what inspired you to create Mythender?
I started working on it back in 2007 when I was really frustrated trying to make another game happen that I put out at Gen Con. A game that I've since thrown away, but in being frustrated with it, my good friend and would-be later my cohort, Lenny Balsera of Fate fame, said, Macklin, you're getting way too tripped on this game. Just make a stupid game about killing dragons or something. And I started writing in my notebook this idea of a game about killing gods, and I wrote this die mechanic down, and from there I just sort of started adding ideas to it. But it really came from being frustrated about making this high concept game about trying to travel through time and forget your memories and all sorts of weirdness. And he's like, make something simple. Turns out I didn't make something simple at all, but that's sort of how it started. And eventually it turned into a thing where a lot of people were excited. I had run at a lot of conventions, and eventually I did a thing where a friend of mine had a friend with a lot of cancer bills, around like $9,000 in debt because of various bills, even though she had medical insurance, which here in the States is a really fun and chaotic and complicated topic. And I decided that I would put up Mythender as a thing that I would do, where if she got enough money, we were raising money for, that I would put the game out for free. And if I didn't get that much money, I would destroy every copy I had, all of my notes and everything. So we got that. We got like the $4,000 that I said I wanted to get in like 3 hours. So like it became a free thing. So, and it's still free now.
An amazing community response, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was just before or like during like the vague days of Kickstarter and stuff like that. So people were definitely hungry to like fund for something that was going to like a good cause.
So we have to ask, why so many dice in this game?
Yeah, so I think my personal kit has um, 6 x 36, so around 200 dice of the 200 d6s of varying colors. And the reason for that is eventually the math spiraled out. Originally, I was going to use all of my Don't Rest Your Head dice, which I had around three times, about almost 100 dice for that game, for 4 players and a GM. And I was going to use those dice for something else because I had so many dice for kind of just that game. And eventually the math spiraled out so that 4 players plus a GM for Mythender is around 200 dice. And the reason that I use all those dice is that during the game, you actually physically accumulate dice when you're doing amazing acts in battle, and you lose those dice when you're hit. So it hacks like the lizard brain part of you that that like sees the accumulation of stuff you have, and sort of turns being hit into a more visceral experience. And watching me being hit, and thus my dice as the myth master going away, also is a more visceral experience. So it's there to kind of take the story that you're telling and turning it into this really intense, emotional on a different level sort of game.
So Ryan, what were your main design goals?
My main design goal, that is a tough question, I guess, because I spent 5 years making this game on and off. I spent about 6 months making the game. My friend Rob Donahue of Evil Hat broke my game in one session, and I spent 3 months being afraid of it and then coming back to it. And then I took a lot of time off of it to work on the Dresden Files role-playing game. But so on and off. And so like each phase, I guess, was a different design goal. Like originally it was, hey, can I make a game in a year that has this quirky idea? The answer is no, by the way, turns out. And then eventually it was like, hey, can I learn how to not be afraid of Rob's really harsh criticism? It turns out yes is the answer to that. And then eventually it became, can I make a game that actually successfully makes role-playing games feel visceral on like on a tactile rather than tactical level? And I think I did pretty well with that. But and eventually the design goal was to finish the game that people have been excited to be playing at conventions for 5 years, which isn't really a design goal so much as I need to get it done.
So how would you sum up Mythender for someone who's new to role-playing?
Oh, Mythender is a horrible game for somebody new to role playing. I would not actually. I mean, because there's so much baggage with how it works that I wouldn't. But the pitch that I give to people who like at conventions or whatnot are familiar with role playing, might be familiar with indie games, is I'll just ask, hey, you want to stab Thor in the face? Simple, direct question. It follows my one of the people that I respect, Robin Laws, who among other things, did like Feng Shui and Gumshoe, has a thing where your pitch should be 25 words or fewer, just to get people interested. And so I told him that, and he's like counting. He's like, okay, your pitch. He sort of smiles like, that pitch is successful. You can continue, Ryan. And so I give that. That is my pitch. And then if they are interested, I talk a little bit more about how it is a game where you go up against gods, but you risk corruption yourself. And because I can say it in person, and I can't actually write this in the book. It's like, do you want to play a Jedi who has to fall to the dark side in order to win? Like that's sort of that's a good cultural touchstone that I use a lot. But yeah, I definitely would not talk about this game to somebody new to role playing. Not at all.
Are there any aspects of the game you think could work better?
Like now, as in like after I've designed it?
Yeah, in hindsight.
Like mechanically, no, but there are a lot of things. There are a few things that I would explain a little better in the text, because back then I didn't want to reveal some of the psychological components to it. I was afraid that, like for instance, the visceral element of having those dice and what that means in play, and how that kind of just tricks your brain into taking the story into a more personal space, and a more sort of really excited space, and a more space of like personal revenge at times, because people just get like, I watch people get like angry, not like in a bad way, but they get angry when I hit them, because it's not just them marking a thing on their sheet, but I'm like, I will sometimes reach over and just like grab the dice from them, and sort of mock and whatnot at the same time. But those psychological tricks, I think I would put more at the forefront. Like, hey, this is a game that does this. That's why it needs so many dice. But back then, I didn't say that because I was too afraid that by hanging a lantern on those particular elements, that it would end up dispelling that. It turns out that's not true. It just took me a lot of watching other people play after it was published to learn that.
Where do you see Mythender going in the future?
Mythender has gone into being more about its setting than its system, which surprised me, because I thought that its setting was paper thin and its system was interesting. And as time goes on, people have asked me, hey, like I've got a Mythender setting in Storium that is about playing mortals in this world trying to get by. There's a Mythender setting in Brian Engard's Becoming, which is about playing a single Mythender, getting revenge on a god and trying to not become a god in the process. And I keep wanting to do things like I played with a Dungeon World hack for it, where you were characters adventuring in Mythic Norden, and you could take on corruption just like Mythenders and gods could. So it's like the setting just keeps appealing to me. It's that harsh isolation, corruption, and I just love like the Norse adventure stories.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's about it for this week. All that's left is to give our final ratings. To keep with our theme, we use a dice rating system on Roll for Adventure, ranging from a D4 to a D20. Bren, what are you going to give Mythender?
Well, just reading the PDF didn't really give me a sense of scale, or just the epic nature of this game. But once we got into it, and it's all the tactile components and rolling huge amounts of dice, really captures just how epic this game is going to be. So I really enjoyed it. So it's a D12 from me.
Bonnie?
Well, I absolutely loved the game. All the games that we've played of this have been so much fun and totally fantastic. I do feel that having that many components is maybe a detractor, but I would go with the game anyway. So it's actually a D20 from me.
And me, as the person that bought those bags and bags of dice, I can really say you do need a lot of components. But I do really love the feel of the game, and I do love the components and just the little touches, like ripping up character sheets if you die. So I'm definitely giving this a D20. You can find out more about Mythender on our website, rollforadventure.com.au. While you're there, you can find the video of this week's show, as well as exclusive web clips and the full version of our interview with Ryan. Next week, we'll be heading into space to try and make our fortune in bulldogs. See you then.